where you realize that it's cheaper to feed your enemies than to kill them. And that lesson has been learned from the ancient bacteria that for a full half of evolution had Earth to themselves. And after 2 billion years, that's about half of evolution, they came together and formed nucleated cells as cooperatives.
Yeah, I'd love to offer or to dive into my curiosity on, before we talk about the pandemic specifically, I'm curious to get a snapshot of your take on, like, where were we even just prior in that moment, in terms of the evolutionary processes and perhaps the converging crises. Like, it wasn't like things were just great, before the pandemic happened, in terms of the impacts we have, the stories that we've been living by, or at least the modern industrial civilization has been living by. And I'd love for you just to help get offer that portrait of that moment before we get to quote, so what's this pandemic all about?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because, after researching this pandemic for it's been over a year and a half now, I came to the conclusion that there really is no way to understand this pandemic if you don't have a broader context, if you don't have an evolutionary context for humanity. And so before the pandemic hit, humanity was in a chrysalis, if you like the butterfly story. I don't know whether Charles brought it up, but so many people do these days. I've been spreading it for 30 years after I got it from Nori Huddle in 1991, so just 30 years. And the thing is that she got the story of a butterfly's metamorphosis from a caterpillar, started using it as a metaphor for what was happening to humanity. And it fit beautifully with what I discovered in evolution, which is a maturation cycle, where species start out by being expansive and competitive and creative and just get into all kinds of interesting troubles and do solve problems and stuff. But eventually it gets very energy expensive to keep staying in this competitive, hostile mode, which is what it turns into. And it's what the Darwinian story, of course, is about. So I see that as the youthful phase of species. And the mature phase is when they stop the expansive economy, stop trying to gain more territory, more goods, more everything, and start leveling off, just the way you, as an individual, your cells multiplied up into adolescence. And then at some point, you couldn't keep growing bigger, right? You had to stop and stabilize and stay at the same size, more or less. And then you shrink a little at my age, right? But anyway, there's that youthful mode, and there's then that mature mode where you realize that it's cheaper to feed your enemies than to kill them. And that lesson has been learned from the ancient bacteria that for a full half of evolution had Earth to themselves. And after 2 billion years, that's about half of evolution, they came together and formed nucleated cells as cooperatives. Now, that nucleated cell was then new on the planet. So another billion years, those single nucleated big cells all went into the youthful, expansive, competitive, mix and match, try things out mode until they built their cooperative. And guess what that was? Multi-celled creatures. And we only learn about evolution from that point on in school, and all that 3/4 before, where the amazing thing to me is that the ancient bacteria were the only other creatures on Earth that caused global hunger crises and then caused global and pollution. It's a long story, and we probably don't have time to get into it, but it's in all of my books.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that nothing up and all the way through evolution up to humans has done that again. Isn't that a weird thing? So here we are right on that cusp of transformation, where the metaphor of the caterpillar as a predatory economy that eats hundreds of times its weight every day and bloats itself until it hangs itself up in a crystal on a tree or a branch of milkweed, if you're a monarch, and goes to sleep in there. And then out of the walls of that, the skin of the caterpillar, which is hardening into a chrysalis, little imaginal cells, and biologists actually call those, because the forming butterfly is an imago. But it's great for the metaphor, because you have to be an imaginal cell to make the butterfly world. They come out of the inside skin of the caterpillar, where they've been held all through the caterpillar's life. The caterpillar was born with two completely separate genomes. And this is because in early evolution, many creatures mixed and matched. And it's as if some creepy crawly thing ate some flippy floppy thing and kept held on to its genome because those genes were useful, but kept them separate and went through two stages of youthful and mature mode. So I like that image of us as imaginal cells trying to build a lighter on the earth butterfly instead of the predatory caterpillar mode, when we get that it's less energy expensive to become cooperative than to maintain hostilities.